Anyhow, how does the world produce power today? Coal is the biggest. Most of the countries and most of the electricity in the world is produced from coal. In America, 50% of the electricity consumed is produced from coal power. China has mostly coal power. India has lots of coal. Many countries in Europe have it. Basically, coal is something that's locally consumed. Yes, you can ship coal around, but basically, the big countries in the world using coal are the countries that have a lot of coal. Saudi Arabia doesn't have coal. So I don't. There will never be an option for Saudi Arabia to start building power plants. That's not going to happen. Um, Coal is, of course, the worst emitter when it comes to CO2. It's also acid rain. Basically, it's one of the dirtier energy sources we have. Natural gas is better, less CO2 per kilowatt, but there's still a lot of CO2 though. And the problem for Saudi Arabia is they're not finding enough. I refer you to section 2, where we discussed that in closer detail. They basically cannot, they wanted to replace oil power plants with gas, but unless they start rapidly developing unconventional oil or find some major gas fields, that's really not going to happen in the foreseeable future. Oil is what they're using in Saudi Arabia today. Saudi Arabia is basically the only country in the world using oil in this way. The main reason for that is oil is so valuable. You can use oil for so many things. You can fly an aircraft with it. You can't really fly an aircraft on coal. Yeah, that's why the price of oil is, as a unit of energy, is much higher than, for instance, gas. But Saudi Arabia is special because they always had so much oil. Hydro, they don't have the country for hydro. They don't have mountains. They don't have a lot of rain, so that's never going to be an option here. Nuclear, there isn't a lot of talk in the last couple of years of the nuclear renaissance. A lot of countries are looking at nuclear. It's a CO2 free production method. Many big emerging markets are now really getting serious or developing their nuclear industry. Of course, there's a big question mark about nuclear right now because of what happened in the Fukushima Daiichi disaster in Japan. It has changed, especially the way most of the many Western countries view it. Germany is one that's really changed their nuclear policy. But again, this is so recent, so I would like the listener to check up on this whenever they listen to this, because this could change. Even for Germany, the nuclear policy they're looking at now is going to be quite expensive, so I'm not sure they're going to go through with it. Anyhow, Saudi Arabia has announced very, very ambitious nuclear plans. I'll get back to that one. Why? Renewables is, of course, the most popular thing in the world these days. It's green, it's clean, it's modern. Yeah. The problem is, of course, that in most countries it's not economical. It requires government subsidies. And there's one major problem for a country like Saudi Arabia. What do you do when there's no sun? Solar energy is, of course, the renewable of choice here in Saudi Arabia. I've been here 4 months. We've had one day of rain and a couple of days with some clouds. Basically, you have sun 360 days a year. Talking about peak capacity and so on, solar is perfect. Solar peak hours during the day are exactly when the consumption is the highest. It fits the curve perfectly. So in many ways, solar is a beautiful energy source for Saudi Arabia, and it is one of the things they're looking into. But there's still a major problem. What do you do during the night, for instance, when there is no sun? I said you cannot store electricity. That's the issue. So you need two things. You need something that can take the base load, which basically all around the year, or all around the day at least, and you need something that can take the peaks. That's why they're thinking about nuclear and solar together. Nuclear is an ideal source for base load. Nuclear takes days to fire up and close down. That means you can never take the peak because you can't. It's very hard to ramp it up and ramp it down. It's not made for that. It's perfect for supplying an even supply of energy on the base load, and solar is perfect for the peaks. So that is what the energy future of Saudi Arabia looks like, or at least the plan is. There's an agency called KAKAR, the King Abdullah Center for Renewable Energies, for Atomic and Renewable Energies. If you read the papers, there's been a lot of this, or a lot of quoting of KAKAR saying we're going to build 16 nuclear plants within 2030. Quite frankly, that's not going to happen. My contact in KAKAR told me that that figure was actually leaked by a hired consultant, not by an official working Qatar. But the funny thing is, it was quoted in every newspaper around the world. I myself didn't know this. I put it in my newsletter as well. The reason why I say they're not going to build 60 nuclear power plants within 2030, just nuclear is very complex. That's one of the drawbacks of nuclear. It's a huge capital investment and takes years, takes 10 years to build a nuclear plant. And before that, you need planning, you need regulatory frameworks, things that are not just there right now. Yes, Saudi Arabia has signed nuclear cooperation agreements with France, the US, and very recently South Korea. And I don't. That's 16 by 2030. I don't believe. At least that. What you'll have to do then is start all 16 at the same time, and you got to start hurrying up basically today. So I don't believe it, but they will build a lot of nuclear power in Saudi Arabia. Now, the major problem when it comes to solar is that nobody knows what the framework is going to be like. If you remember the previous slide, we discussed what oil is sold to utilities domestically. Nothing can compete with oil at when you buy oil at $10-20, nothing. The fact is, the funny thing with Saudi Arabia is, a lot of people are skeptical of renewables because they'll say, oh, it requires huge government subsidies. The only reason we have solar industries in countries like Spain and Germany is because of the subsidies, which is true. The only thing I must say, and I'm not a tree hugger environmentalist really, but in Saudi Arabia, solar energy really is starting to make sense. Things have changed in this business the last couple of years. The price of solar panels have fallen by roughly 50%. The efficiency of solar panels has increased by roughly 30%. Now, does that mean solar energy is going to be economical in Norway? Never, or at least not in the foreseeable future. But in Saudi Arabia, with 360 days of sun each year, one of the highest levels of solar radiation, we're starting to see. Basically, if you use the world price for oil and compared, oil sold in the world market versus solar power in Saudi Arabia, basically the same. It depends a little who you ask. This is something funny. Every time you listen to people talking about the economics of power production, they all have different ways of calculating. For instance, if you're going to build a wind farm, you will have anybody who wants to be very pro. He will never include the costs of building transmission lines out there and all these other excess costs. Whilst the ones who wants to argue for nuclear power, he will probably include the transmission lines for the wind park and so on. This is a little politics as well, of course. So it's hard for me to say right now if solar energy and oil can compete right now. But I'm guessing they're about the same, roughly speaking. And if this development in the solar energy continues, in a few years they might be actually a lot cheaper than using oil. Again, like I said, nobody else uses oil, and one thing is if you use I'm using the world oil price, which is not the one used here in Saudi Arabia. So either they'll have to start using the international price of oil domestically, which are not, which means they basically have to have some sort of subsidy regime for the renewables and nuclear energy industry. And that is what everybody is waiting for right now. I don't dare to say when this is going to happen. I've heard that it might happen in a few months, but it could also be much further away. I don't know. All I know is everybody's waiting for it, and the one who will develop this is then Qatar, the King Abdullah Center for Atomic and Renewable Energies. I recommend whoever's listening to this, whenever they do, Google it, see what's happened, because most likely there has been quite a big development since this presentation was made. And of course, I'm talking about the energy future. I'm not talking about replacing all the oil plants out there, or oil-fired electricity plants out there. I'm talking about stemming the change, keeping that one ratio I talked about earlier, keeping the exports high, keeping the exports per capita at least as high as possible for future generations. That sums up this section. Thank you for listening, and please follow us to section 6, construction and transport infrastructure.